Hi, I'm Mike Miller. Hope you're having a great day. Thanks so much for watching the shows that I do. I really appreciate it. My guest today is an interesting, very knowledgeable guy with a mission, and I'm honored to have Chris Oliver Times. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
You've lived in the Denton area a number of years off and on.
Off and on, I lived here in Denton starting around age 19 or so, and I lived here for about 8 years.
Yeah.
And I was gone for roughly a decade and have been back in town for about 3 or 4 months now.
Yeah, yeah. You lived in Manhattan for a while, Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, exactly. Yeah, when I left Denton, I moved up to Brooklyn and lived there for about 4 or 5 years, and I've lived on the side of a mountain in Colorado for a couple summers. Beautiful. Best summers you could possibly ask for, and some of the coldest winters you could possibly ask for.
I bet.
And for the last few years, I was actually living out in California, Palm Springs in the desert.
Oh, really? Now in Brooklyn, you were still doing some programming work?
I was a professional programmer slash database developer for a company. And I did that for about 15 years through various jobs.
You were doing that at age 9, you said you started doing
Yeah, I started programming when I was age 9. I was
fascinated with it.
Yeah, just I was always attracted to computers, and when I learned that I could make it do what I wanted it to do, I thought, hey, cool, I got to learn more about that, and just thus was born a lifelong obsession with data and patterns and the art of processing information.
Computers have really changed our lives so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. For better or for worse, it's a great tool in a lot of ways, but in other ways, it's also just another form of spreading propaganda.
Yeah, yeah. And too much busyness, it seems like to me.
Too much busyness.
So some of the projects we were talking about, like you mentioned, the Philadelphia project is something that you became interested in.
Well, that became much later, and I guess this is as good of time to start telling my story about my strange year. I had just finished up making a website that I had been working on for 2.5 years, and I was kind of in a lull trying to figure out what my next project was going to be.
Yeah.
And I was just inspired to learn all I could about conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And
just in general.
Just in general, and it all started with actually the 1990s Senate testimony of 2 women regarding the MK Ultra project. And the MK Ultra project was a secret, it was either US Navy or CIA, I'm not sure, but it was basically all about mind control and the US government's attempt to create sleeper agents and just various forms of mind control by use of hallucinogenic drugs, torture, and well, child rape. There's no nice way of putting that.
When was that? That was back in the 40s or 50s?
I believe MK Ultra started in the 60s.
In the 60s.
But the Senate testimony I was watching was from grown women who had endured those horrible atrocities. And that's really what opened the rabbit hole for me. Because that was, like I said, U.S. Senate testimony. The U.S. government paid those women afterwards for the trials they'd been through, and that's really what inspired me to go, well, you know, what other terrible things has my government been up to? And that kind of led me to the testimony of a guy named Chip Tatum, who was an ex-Navy, I believe, special agent or special operations gentleman who turned whistleblower after he had left the U.S. Navy, and also the research of a gentleman named Ted Gunderson, who was the FBI. He was in charge of the FBI field offices on the West Coast.
Really?
And Chip talks a lot about secret operations, basically how the U.S. government will go into a region and destabilize it either through economic sanctions or these covert activities. And then after the region's been destabilized go, well, it's an unstable region, we need to go in and create the peace. And this is something we did in Vietnam, this is something we did in Korea, this is something we did in Iraq. This is just a recurring pattern of our government. And so I learned all I could from Chip, and then I moved on to Ted Gunderson, who was primarily focused on satanic cults here in America, and the pedophilia rings, and also learned about the Franklin cover-up, which was a pedophile ring that was being run through DC and Ohio, and that all revolved around a gentleman named Lawrence King, commonly known as Larry King, but not that Larry King. Yeah, so that's really kind of what opened up the rabbit hole for me. And every time I thought I'd found the bottom of the rabbit hole, I just ended up finding a little side passage that took me down even further. And then I started learning more about better known conspiracies, JFK and 9/11. There's a lot of interesting clues kind of regarding the bigger picture with 9/11. And then I started learning about more obscure conspiracy theories like the Philadelphia experiment, in Project Montauk, which involve time travel, alien species, and personality transfers from body to body by means of electromagnetism. So that was really the strangest of it all, was those two.
Those are kind of interesting.
They were fascinating to learn about. And according to that law, or according to those conspiracy theories, the U.S. government's been in contact with not one but two alien species since the days of Truman.
Really?
Well, it was Nikola Tesla who initially claimed to have made contact with an alien race, and it was also Tesla that started the initial Philadelphia experiment, which is they were trying to make ships invisible both to radar and to the naked eye, and supposedly they accidentally created a portal in space-time, so fascinating stuff, but quite a topic, and none of it's true. It's all propaganda. It's all layers of a bigger deception. And the layers of deception basically go terrorists, government conspiracies, Masons/Satanists, which you're going to start hearing more about that soon, the Illuminati, and then aliens. And that's the layers of deception, but none of it's true. It's all part of a larger deception to keep us afraid and to keep us busy.
Keep us concerned and busy.
It's an illusion of choice. And that is the primary purpose of our media, be it newspapers, TV, or even the internet, is to maintain that illusion of choice, to keep people busy and to keep people worried.
Well, what are some good sources on Tesla, just to find out what he was really involved with at that time?
Actually, the Wikipedia is a pretty good. If you're just looking for a straight biography of Tesla, Wikipedia is a good source for that. An interesting.
Who writes for those?
Well, Wikipedia is it's an open source. Anyone can go in and edit it.
Can, yeah.
Right, anyone can edit it, and it's going to, Wikipedia itself is part of the propaganda. It's part of the deception. So you're not going to see any conspiracy theories on Wikipedia. Yeah. But if you're just looking for dry facts, Wikipedia is a great source.
A quick source.
And an interesting side note about Nikola Tesla: when he died, the FBI gathered up all of his research notes and basically said afterwards, all the Tesla's supposed doomsday machine that he's been talking about, yeah, we found the notes. Don't worry, it doesn't work. Nothing to worry about. And even more interesting is the gentleman who analyzed his notes and made that announcement was Donald Trump's uncle.
Really?
Yeah, small world, and not a coincidence. I'm very much of the opinion these days that there are no coincidences. We are watching a play.
Everything is meant to be.
Everything is meant to be. Everything that happens for multiple purposes. It's all the classic motto of the Illuminati is plans within plans, and I personally believe believe there's not an Illuminati, that it's just that one of those last layers of the deception. But that plans within plans motif definitely pops up again and again.
How do you feel about aliens?
I was actually hung up on aliens for quite some time, and this kind of ties well into 9/11, and one of the things everyone's forgotten about 9/11, besides the fact that 7 buildings went down that day, wasn't 2 buildings, wasn't 3 buildings, 7 buildings went down that day.
Including, there's how many in New York?
Oh, that's all within that same little area. It was World Trade Center buildings 1 through 7 that all went down.
Yeah, and then the Philadelphia buildings. Later that day, weren't there a couple of buildings?
I don't know anything about the Philadelphia buildings.
Oh, really?
No, but one of the things everyone's forgotten about 9/11 was the hurricane that accompanied it, and that was Hurricane Aaron. Do you remember Hurricane Aaron?
Prior to it?
No, it happened on 9/11.
Really?
Hurricane Aaron, it's kind of interesting. It started, it's quite interesting actually. It started around the Bermuda Triangle, where many hurricanes do seem to start.
Yeah.
It traveled north by northwest up the east coast of the United States, staying about 50 miles off shore.
Really?
On 9/11 itself, it actually was 50 miles away from New York City,
Really?
where it just stopped and stayed there until World Trade Center 7 went down that evening. After all the buildings fell, then the hurricane started moving away north by northeast. And that was one of the biggest clues to me that hurricanes can be controlled. And this is not just my opinion. Actually, the research of Dr. Judy Wood is what really opened my eyes to what happened on 9/11, because I had done, a lot of research trying to figure out, what brought those buildings down. 2 planes didn't bring down 7 buildings. That's easy enough. And then the first conspiracy theory you'll run into is the one about nanothermite, that supposedly government contractors had wired all those buildings with explosives prior to the attacks, and it was those explosives that brought the rubble down. And there has been trace amounts of nanothermite found in the rubble around the World Trade Center buildings afterwards. But that didn't jive with me. That didn't, the amount of logistics and the amount of explosives you would need to bring down, over 200 stories of steel and concrete skyscrapers. I know secret agencies can get away with a lot of stuff, but that seemed like too much even for them. So I was searching for an explanation that made sense. And it wasn't until I came across the research of Dr. Judy Wood that it began to make sense. And it is her opinion that they were brought down by electromagnetism. The reason they fell so quickly is because they were destabilized on a molecular level. And going back to the hurricanes are an excellent source of electromagnetic energy. And the reason that hurricane was moved up there and remained next to New York during the attacks was so that the electromagnetism could be harnessed to bring down those buildings.
Kind of like what Tesla created, some kind of apparatus that made a building shake.
You're referring to Tesla's earthquake machine?
Yeah, I don't know what it's called.
I believe that's what it's commonly referred to. Not something I'm terribly familiar with, but Dr. Judy Wood's theory was the first one that actually...
Oh, that's different. That is a different theory.
Yeah. Dr. Judy Wood, she's a forensics engineer with 30 years of experience who did a decade of research on what she calls the crime scene.
Yeah.
And there's several telling signs. One of the most telling is that all the cars around the World Trade Center, the door handles of all the cars got melted off. Many of the cars suffered instant rustification and severe burnings on the cars themselves, but then you'd have trees right next to these cars that were completely unharmed. And so these cars weren't hit by fire, they weren't hit by debris, they were hit by that same electromagnetic energy that brought down the buildings themselves.
Really?
And one of the other big clues about hurricanes being controlled is actually Hurricane Katrina. Because when before Hurricane Katrina happened, there was a 2-week warning that it was likely to hit New Orleans. And that is unheard of in the world of hurricanes. Normally you get 2, maybe 3 days warning, but Katrina, they were giving a 2-week advanced warning. And those just seem like big clues to me, and just the realization that hurricanes could be controlled. I just kept asking myself, who could possibly have the technology to control, who could possibly have that technology to control hurricanes? And that's part of why I was hung up on aliens for quite some time, was just because, I thought with a super ancient race would come super advanced technology, But I later realized that that itself was part of the deception.
That there are no alien. You don't believe there is intelligent life on any other planets in the solar system?
I am personally of the opinion that our universe is much smaller than we've been led to believe. That the ancient religions had it right, and we've been led astray in the name of science, but our Earth is flat. We do not live on a globe. Our universe is very small. It is just our flat Earth, the sun, and the moon.
The stars are closer than we think.
The stars are closer than we think, the sun is smaller than we think, and the sun is also closer than we've been told.
And there probably aren't any other planets out there amongst all the stars.
There are most likely other universes, but there are no other planets. We are alone in our universe. We have been deceived just so that we so we don't realize just how important we are in this reality. That is my opinion. And there is a lot of evidence for a flat Earth online that I highly encourage people to check out. The most telling, in my opinion, are the constellations. Because if you go out at night and you look up at the stars and you see the constellations, these are the same constellations that astronomers were documenting thousands of years ago. So if we are on a planet that's spinning 1,000 miles an hour on its axis, that's spinning, I think it's 50,000 miles around our sun, a sun that itself is supposedly spinning 500,000 miles around a central black hole, how is it possible that after 2,000 years we have the same constellations that we did when the ancient astronomers were documenting these things? And Polaris is really the most telling of them. In order for Polaris to remain over our North Pole as it has for quite some time, it would have to match the wobble of our planet on its axis, it would have to match the rotation of our planet around the sun, and it would have to match the rotation of the sun around that black hole. And so, Polaris is supposedly like 200 plus light years away. It's supposedly quite so far away, so how could something that far match all those different movements? There is no reason to, with the explanations that have been given.
Yeah, I never thought about it too much.
But one of the other big clues, I think, that the Earth is flat are clouds. Because if clouds are moved by wind, and if those winds are moving around a spherical object, I would expect the clouds to take on the same arc as the sphere that it's moving around. But clouds are flat. I mean, they're not perfectly 2D, but they're definitely way more flat than they are arced.
You think we should be able to see the curve of the
Absolutely,
skyline? Yeah.
Absolutely. And you can observe that both in the sky and on the ground, because with the globe model that we've been told, we should see 8 inches of curvature for every mile squared. And so if you can see 50 miles, which you can in some areas on a clear day, you should be able to see a 1/4 mile of curvature in every direction. Because if you're on a sphere, no matter where you are on the sphere, you're on the highest point.
It would go down 1/4 mile?
At 50 miles, you should be able to see a 1/4 mile of curvature. And especially if you look at any large body of water, our oceans are all flat, whereas water should conform to the curvature of our planet, but they don't. And engineers never account for the curvature of Earth whenever they're building railways, whenever they're building bridges or tunnels. All these things are built completely flat. And in fact, if a train had to deal with that curvature of the Earth, it wouldn't actually have the power to go up that continuous hill.
It would be that steep?
8 inches per mile, yeah, it would add up.
8 inches per mile.
Right, 8 inches per mile squared, yeah. But for something big and heavy like a locomotive, it would take so much energy to drag all that extra freight up that our current locomotives just wouldn't have the power.
And you said mile squared?
Yeah, mile squared.
Not a square mile?
No, not a square mile. So it'd be 8 inches for 1 mile. It would be 4 times 8 is 32, 32 inches for 2 miles. So it goes up exponentially.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I'd have to have some paper to write it down.
I've done the math, but I highly encourage you to do the math for yourself. And
this is a big movement worldwide now, isn't it? The flat Earth.
Yeah, and
concept.
it's not new to our century. There's been flat earthers popping up for quite some time.
So the entire Earth as we know it is all on the same, is on the top.
Yeah, our planet is basically shaped like a plate, and the North Pole would be directly in the middle of the plate, and that is, you know, our magnetic north. And so if you are traveling west by using a compass, that compass is always going to point north, so you're going to feel like you're going straight around, but really you'll be going around in a circle. And our planet is actually encompassed by Antarctica. Antarctica actually goes all the way around our planet. And what's outside of Antarctica? That's a very good question.
The other side, nobody's ever been to the other side and come back.
No one that I know of. There are people who believe that there is extra land on the other side of Antarctica. But that kind of ties back into the whole Masons and Illuminati theory of trying to keep the people sequestered into this planet. I don't personally believe that myself. I'm just leaving that one a big question mark.
That's a subject the Masons have looked at over the years.
Well, I mean, if you think about how far back, you know, we didn't believe that we were living in a heliocentric universe until the work of Copernicus, which was in the 16th century, I believe. So that would be a pretty long-reaching conspiracy.
Most of the ancients thought the world was flat.
Most of the ancient religions believed that the Earth was flat, yes, and that we were living under some sort of dome, that the stars were being projected from that dome. And it's if you take a time-lapse photo of the stars, you will notice that Polaris stays still, and the rest of the stars rotate counterclockwise around it.
Yeah.
But yes, most ancient religions, to the best of my knowledge, believe that the world was flat. And we've been led astray in the name of science. So I'm highly skeptical of basically any science I cannot verify myself.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm certainly not going to sit here and tell you that all science is false. That can't possibly be true, but there are definitely some bigger points that have been overlooked, things we just take for granted. I try to rely on just logic, good old-fashioned logic.
What are some of the other things you've mentioned, like at the open mics when you first start talking?
I do enjoy doing the open mics here in town. That was actually one of the allures of coming back to Denton, is there used to be a thriving open mic scene when I lived here.
Yeah.
And I was hoping that it would still be here, and thankfully it is.
The non-humans.
The non-humans, yes. I generally start my my open mics by asking, "Are you human?" It's a simple question. Let's try it now. Are you human?
Yes.
Fantastic. It's a real simple, easy question, but I've met a couple dozen people who cannot provide that direct yes answer. And they'll say things like, yes, as far as I know, yes, I believe so. I met one particularly crafty little demon who, he's like, well, what do you mean, am I human? Do you mean like spiritually? Do you mean like physically? Am I human? Yes or no? Yes. And that was clever, because what he did was not answer my question. He created a new question, yes or no, and answered that.
But what is it about the non-humans, though?
Well, I mean, that's just it. We've been deceived by evil. We've been deceived by a most ancient of evils who wants to keep us afraid. I mean, and they run our media to present an illusion of choice. They run our religions to deter you from your spirituality. And they run our governments to make you feel afraid and distrustful. I mean, that is their ultimate goal, is to keep you afraid and preventing you from realizing your true form, which is spirit. I mean, we are spirits in the material world.
And they just blend right in. They just look like anybody else.
Absolutely. They look human, they act human, but they certainly are not human. And they're real easy to spot once you know what to look for. They are the people who nitpick too much. They are the people that are angry without cause. They are the people that turn discussions into arguments and then refuse to lose the argument, especially people who bring race or religion into an argument that has nothing to do with race or religion. And basically the people who spend their time telling you how terrible your fellow man is, because they're trying to divide us as a people, as is most of our modern society. I mean, everything from, what sports team do you love, or what TV, well, maybe not what TV shows, but, so much of our society is merely designed to split us into groups, to divide us as a people.
There seems to be a lot of that going on.
Absolutely.
These days.
That's not a coincidence. That is all very intentionally designed.
And they die, they age and just die regular deaths just like everybody else, though.
They live what seem to be perfectly normal human lives. But yes, they absolutely walk amongst us. And they are your friends, they are your lovers, they could be your family.
How do you think they're conceived?
The same way we were all conceived. They were created by our infinite creator.
But they just don't have souls, or?
I can't claim to fully understand how it all works.
Yeah.
I just know that they're not human, and they're here for nefarious purposes. They're here to keep us afraid, and they're here to keep us working and dependent on a system that we don't need. We are children in a perfect garden created specifically for us. We never left the Garden of Eden. We've just been deceived into not seeing it.
Well, you have some interesting ideas for sure.
I've had a strange summer.
It leaves me a lot to think about, but I appreciate you coming on here to share your information with us, and thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.